Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, Resplendent Files No. 2. As a child, the greatest feeling other than a mother's love is the end of school and the beginning of summer. This child, who has gone through school which in his perspective held to finally be released from an unfair and unruly set of governance out to the anarchist playground. Now clearly, I am over-exaggerating, but am I really? Quite frankly, I have never been one to experience summer. All of mine were stolen away from me. My father died before I had ever met him. Because of this, I have had no male influence, or at least no good male influence. I cannot stand up for myself. I've never been taught that. I cannot think for myself. That's something that needs to be learned from a father. Since I was never provided with a father, I needed to find new ways to learn these skills. I first started with my mother. Her first name was Susan. Her maiden name was Tia Linda's mother. She fed me and cared for me in every way she could. I was fed 3 times a day. Full-course meals. My favorite meal was breakfast. I loved waking up to the scent of eggs and bacon, something so scrumptious made just for me. Funny how simple words like that remind you of the absence of a father, just for me. I soon lost the enjoyment of those mornings when school rolled along. I had grown older, and the walls of my home grew colder. My mother pulled me from public school in the 3rd grade. She recalls me telling her a story about how Mr. Portman had played a special game with me that no one else could know about. Of all my days as a youngster, I remember the day my mother drew a picture of a stick figure and asked me to point where Mr. Portman said the game started. I would point, and when I did, she began crying but strong and said, "I was a good boy for telling her." She ran her soft fingers through my hair and hugged me. Her hugs were medicine, ISN. That what mothers are though. Medicine? I was in homeschooling for the next 3 years. By the time it was 5th grade, my mother placed me back into a more social environment, even though I felt displaced in this new setting. Private school was acceptable. She was very nervous about letting me go into a school building at the time. 3 years seemed so long to me, being that I was only 10 years old now. To her, though, it must have felt like 5 minutes, and I was entering back into Mr. Portman's class to play a game. Throughout the rest of my school years, my mother walled me from anything she deemed unsafe or unhealthy. My separation from a normal life only made this safe one worse. I never knew the insane. I never had the popular clothing. The kids at the school rejected me. I didn't understand why they disliked me. Sometimes I'd begin crying in class silently. When another student would notice, I immediately became the center of attention. I began to become pelted with every object a classroom could hold that was light enough for a child to throw. One time the teacher required that I stop crying all the time because I would disrupt her class too much. I don't see how telling me to stop would make a difference. The many raps on my knuckles never stopped me from crying. Quite the opposite. In 8th grade, I met a girl named Meredith. So as my life exceeded, my mother's fell behind on June 5, 1964. My mother committed suicide. I walked into my mother's room looking for laundry and saw her lying in the bed. Silent, many empty cases of pills were lying on her bedside table. Officials gave me a note that was tucked under her shirt when they had searched her room. The note said, "Annie dearest, remember the old saying, curiosity killed the cat. For some reason this phrase has been embedded into my very brain for the past 2 years. It got me thinking, why is curiosity killing the cat? What makes curiosity so mad that it wanted to slaughter a poor little cat? Sometimes I would sit for hours upon hours and contemplate little phrase, trying to understand what it meant. I even went to the point of researching what it even meant. Would you like to know what I learned? Of course you would, my love, for how else do you better understand something without a little background? Curiosity killed the cat, or originally known as "How killed the cat," was an old proverb which was printed first in 1598 in the play Every Man in His Humour. It was an original play written by a British playwright whose name was Ben Jonson. In 1599, Shakespeare even used this proverb in his play Much Ado About Nothing. What courage, man! What though care killed a cat? Thou hast metal enough in thee to kill care. Ebenezer Cockburn Brewer, in 1898, included a definition to go with this phrase. Care killed the cat. It is said that the cat has 9 lives, yet care would wear them all out. In 1909, a short story written by and retitled Schools and Schools explains it in more depth here. Curiosity can do more things than kill a cat, and if emotions, while recognized as feminine, are inimical to feline life, then jealousy would soon leave the whole world catless. Care killed the cat. Not sure I've ever heard of it said this way until I stumbled upon it. I think I enjoy that saying more than curiosity killed the cat. Curiosity only alludes to wonder at how something works or is. Care becomes a more personal calling. It brings upon thoughts of worry, woe, and sorrow, though care can also cause you to love, which is never a bad thing. Things became tough as you grew older. I should have known that you would mature and want to be with your friends more than me. It's only natural to be honest, though. I don't think I was built to let go of you. If you didn't know this already, I found out about Meredith. Now don't think I was following you around or anything. A mother can see it in her son's eyes when he looks at that special someone. It's the same look your father would give me when we gazed at each other. I miss your father. There aren't better words to describe it than as missing. You may not have noticed, but when I would make a lot of food sometimes, it wasn't 'cause I knew you were hungry truthfully. I would go back to the days when I was a child, making a large portion of food for an invisible friend of mine. I never expected to be extra serving to be eaten. Oftentimes I would let it sit while I sat and waited. I was eager to see if something would really move the meal I provided. I wish that happened when I made those extra meals at dinner. I wish it wasn't just your voice asking for more. Alas, I see you are content with Meredith. I know you will do great. There's a lot of your father in you, if you don't mind. I'll leave you with another instance where curiosity killed the cat. Stephen King writes often in his novels a line that I find that curiosity killed the cat. Satisfaction brought him back. You brought him back, honey. Now I'm gonna go see him. Susan, your mother, my mother's life, never came across as broken, but now mine wish she may have known how I looked at Meredith. I inspired at the beauty of her creation. I'm not sure if my mother ever saw Meredith look at me, though. She would do whatever everyone else did, disregard my existence. Now my life was left in shambles, and I wondered where God was. Excerpt from Resplendent, File Article 1. I felt it a requirement to have such a large chunk of the files posted for you, because I'm going to talk about it. Like Susan said, I should give you guys a little background, or just a bigger understanding of it. My first run through Father Jeremiah's article, one didn't leave me impressed. The more I read it though, the more his writing appeals to me. The heart that's placed into each word seems precise and exact. Almost like it took him 15 years to write this story, not completed 15 years ago. His childhood really just sucks, for lack of a better word. I can see why he would grow to fear God. Father Jeremiah just kept getting things taken away from him over and over. First his father, then his innocence, a content school life, and a mother no doubt that this would cause submission. Wonder what the big man was thinking. And who was Meredith? In 8th grade, I met a girl named Meredith. Why is this even relevant to the story besides it being in Sue's note? Was she just some random girl? Well, from my experience, a writer has a point to everything that is said, so she must be important somehow. It's beyond me though. I've never thought of it before until now, but have you ever thought of the life of a mother? Now please think, past the nursing and working in the kitchen jokes you hear in day CTUAL. I don't even think the mothering process begins at birth so much after thinking hard about it. There has to be a lot of mental prep for a new mother beforehand. The thought of bringing forth new life into the world and calling it your own. Not to mention the stress of pregnancy and birth. Then as the baby is out and about, she needs to be home to watch and take care for it. Here comes the stress of worrying over a fragile newborn. I mean, anything could be dangerous when someone is that small. Taking baths and walking up and down steps seem like they would be unbelievably dangerous. Now the child is starting to talk, so the mother begins to watch what they say so they don't learn inappropriate speech. Since he can talk, she puts the child into preschool, having Sadly for Susan, those fears came true, and that's probably what made her curious. Her fear of what might happen next got her thinking and thinking. Junior high and high school comes along, and this child is now a young adult, capable of making his own choices. He strays further from his mother, but there is still a connection. It isn't severed. The mother is now worried he will treat a girl wrong. The perversion that a boy can grow up to become is probably on her mind often. Enough about months. That's an odd topic. Last Tuesday I went to hang out with a friend of mine at a club. Club Dawn. Kinda seems cliché, and yet none has named their club that. My friend Johnny Greenwood, just to cover up, name it. I guess not R-E-L-L-Y Johnny Greenwood. He looks like Johnny though, so why not name him that? And I went to Club Dawn at about 9 p.m. that night. The usual DJ was playing his custom mixes, and the bartender had my cold beer ready for me. The club seemed more crowded than usual. I didn't mind. It just meant I had more chances to get shot down by older women. Oh wait, I have an arranged marriage. While talking to a girl whose name I can't remember, probably caused by the Heineken, my hearing would drop in and out. That could also be the reason I don't remember her name. I thought it was just the blaring of repetitive bass kicks in my ears, so I stepped outside. The girl decided she would follow me, holding onto my arm with her clammy hands like we were an item. I wasn't going to shake her off, but with how much she was drinking, I practically had to hold her up. Stepping out into the chilly air, I looked around. Tall buildings and lights really ruin the night sky. No stars. I forgot about Mystery Girl for a moment and just took in the night air. It was filled with car fumes, and any other dirty smells you would expect in a city. I can't exactly explain the smells. Nothing really smells like it. But I'll try my best. Wet dog mixed with sour eggs. Throw and mix in some sweat from a man who worked out all day. And put a background smell of dying rodents. None of these were pleasant. Neither is the real smell of a city. Coming back into myself, I remembered I had someone on my arm who expected me to safely get her to her apartment, and maybe expected more than that. I couldn't drive because as much as she was wasted, I had quite a few drinks to it. Takes only a fraction of a second for your brain to register what you want to say, and then for your mouth to say. Because of this proven fact, I wondered why I wasn't saying anything at this moment. More or less, why I couldn't hear myself speak. I felt my lips move. I even saw everyone else's mouths move. Still no noise. Almost like everyone's vocal cords just shut down. I could still hear all the sounds that are made up throughout a city. Sirens yelling. The occasional gunshot. Thankfully, not talking to anybody in a city or in a cab that is picking somebody up isn't exactly abnormal. The cab driver probably thought I was either mental or from a different country. At least I didn't have to talk. She did it all while in the cab. She kept trying to snuggle up with me while I tried to get her seatbelt on. Women these days. While in the cab, driving at around 30 miles an hour with the occasional red light, I began to feel dizzy beyond belief. I couldn't look outside for more than a few seconds without my eyes almost rolling back into my head, now that I had rusted nails being shoved into and then moved within my brain. I turned to only look at what was in the cab. I looked at the missus in the opposing seat. She wasn't model-worthy, but she was worth the time of day. She was light chocolate skin, straight hair went down to her shoulders, maybe a little bit further. Brunette, her eyes were on the brink of being too far apart and too far into her skull. They were light yellow, very unique color. Her eyelashes were thick, making it look like I'd be blown away when she blinked. Her nose already looked like a nose job had been done, though no obvious signs of one. Then her lips soft, dark pink lipstick. Says I'm dirty but shy. She didn't do a good job of matching her clothes though. Maybe she was colorblind. I wouldn't put it past myself to think that. Then I looked up at the driver as I began to grow tired of her. Let's give her a name. Yasmin. Hard to describe him at this point. His eyes were on the road, as they should. He ran a stoplight, a near miss from a passing Toyota. I forgave him, but then he continued to run stoplights, and I could hear the cars behind us that were crashing, and the shrieks from the passengers, whose limbs were probably now either severed or immobilized. Now my body began to feel nightmarish. Not because I was afraid. Clearly this driver could go fast enough to not get us crashed. But the other people, he just ignored as if they didn't exist, just offing them like game. By this point I looked at Yasmin. She was so far out of it I didn't even know she was human anymore. My jaw was now sore from my own teeth gritting against themselves that I had to open my mouth and stretch it. As my mouth opened, fluids that should have stayed in my stomach poured onto the car seat. The mixture of dread, dizziness, and alcohol turned like a whirlpool, and I couldn't help but ruin the guy's car seat. Yasmin didn't even look at me, disgusted, thinking I would die from an accident by this crazy man, or from fear. I grabbed her hand, feeling like it would be the last woman I see in my life. Cold. One thing I know about people with clammy hands is that they never go cold. Looking up at her again, I noticed her eyes lost the color they originally were. She had died, and I knew it for sure how. She was just sitting there. Did she really drink that much? With her limp body lying there was staring me down. I leaned back, as far against the door. I heard the consistent screams of terror continue, as the driver blew street light after street light. This is about the time he turned and looked at me. All sound dropped as his eyes met mine. I tried to look away, but my eyes were completely relaxed. My heart and mind began to fade away, and I began to have tunnel vision. All that my eyes saw were his eyes equally leveled. His mouth began to open. I couldn't see it, but I could tell by how his eyes had squinted slightly. My muscles felt like they were being pulled toward him, straight off the bone. A feeling only comparable to the awful growing pains you get when you're growing up as a child, only worse when it never lets up. All noise cut out. Everything was silent now. No more screams, no more crushing. I could see now. No more tunnel vision. The movement out the window froze. I don't mean frozen like still and unmoving, more like a photo that captures motion but has a major blur along the movement. The car had practically froze, and in time relative to my vision and its movement. Seeing the driver's mouth, I shut her teeth, if you could call them that, had grown in all kinds of direction. There was no back to his throat, just black from what it looked like. It wasn't dark like the absence of light, but dark like nothing could exist there. He began to speak. What came out of his mouth was not what I expected. He asked if I was all right, his voice so calm and soft. Time continued, and as time continues, motion does too. Of all things to stop moving though. It was my cab. We were in the center of an intersection. So were many other cars about to crush us. The initial jolt of the crush commenced. My head whipped back and forth. Left and right. Slow motion came back to me, almost like a film would, to show off how intense the crash would be. I still felt every single shard of metal, glass, stone, and rubber shooting into my skin. Time slowed, so I could feel these objects shooting into my skin at such slow speeds. I began screaming. My scream never came. It took too long to muster up the power to do it. Yasmin flew out her seatbelt. The driver continued to look at me. His mouth now opened abnormally wide, and his eyes still piercing me. His mouth continued to open. The crash must have jolted him, causing his head to swing, and with his mouth open, it must have caused it to open too wide. His cheeks began to rupture, and I could see his jaw and cheekbone separate from each other. Acre was crushing into his side of the cabin. It had, after so much time, hit him in the back. His head swam again, and his neck tore. Not enough to kill him though. Yasmin was now between the seats. Glass was slowly flowing into my eye. My loss of vision wasn't as instantaneous as I thought it would be. Black began to cloud my eyes from the inside out. Not how I thought it would be either. The rubber from the tires was now burning right into my skin. They must have heated up when the drivers hit the brakes. The slow rise in pain was unbearable as everything began to ride through my skin. Glass staring into my eyes, heading through my head and slicing through everything in its way. The metal of both the cab and car started to bend my arm out of shape. My legs were now being cut from the knee down. My scream still hadn't reached out of my body. All my senses began to diminish. Yasmin landed on me. Then I began to hear Yasmin telling me to move, so she could get out of the cab. I looked at her puzzled. What in the world just happened? Wasn't I just dying? Still burnt from my many beers though. I shoved it into the back of my head for later. I was glad Yasmin's face was the first thing that brought me back to real life. I was so relieved that I was eager to do anything tonight. We were at her building. It wasn't all that bad. I didn't exactly have the condition of the apartment home in my mind. Zim grabbed a hold of my hand and pulled me out of the car. I dropped a couple dollars into the cab and shut the door. The smell of the city wasn't here. I hadn't looked around yet. Turns out she lives around the suburbs. It was nicer than the city though. More trees than the smell are the only differences between the city and the suburbs. Yasmin had me step up into her apartment home, and she led me through the home up to her apartment. She lived on the 3rd floor. Her room wasn't that bad. It was modern looking, white and black, as well reassuring my previous inference that she might be colorblind. She continued to pull me throughout her apartment. We ended up in her kitchen. She told me to wait where I was and did a quick turn towards her cabinets. Yasmin pulled out some wine glasses and wine to go with them. I thought she was crazy at first for even thinking getting Emory drunk was a good idea. But then she was drunk, so she had no good ideas. She was about to place the glasses and wine onto the table when the slow motion feeling came back. She then started to fall, standing there unable to move fast enough to grab her and help. I watched as she fell onto her clean white floor. She put her hand out to stop her. But the glasses were in her hand. First, the bottom of the glasses began to shatter. The shard shot in all directions. As she continued to fall, the glasses shattered up into her skin. Her hand and wrist began to be riddled with glass. Blood was now seeping through the cuts and slowly spattered onto the ground. Time sped up and then slowed down again. Her face was now landing in the glass. I was glad not to see it. Wine and blood was now mixing to create a dark black stain on the floor. I started to fall onto my knees. I didn't know what I could do. My body was just being weird, and nothing was happening right. Yasmin had died again. Time froze, and all that changed was my hearing. It seemed to speed up to some point in time, and continued to proceed from then on out. All I heard was heavy breathing and an occasional whine. The television was on. I could hear it in the background. It began to drown out the breathing. The news was on, talking of an incident it clubbed on. Then time began to clock back into the right place. Heck, by this point I didn't know what part in time was the right place. I was being pushed down. Sweat poured from my body, and I felt a strain below my hips. The wake of the sheets in Yasmin's bed was small, and the television was on loud. Yasmin's quiet wails were finding their way through the sound of the news broadcaster. I couldn't feel any scars from glass on her. My body felt it high, and hers was higher. Time would freeze occasionally at this point, and I didn't mind it that much. Of all the times time could break, this was the best time. The news station on the television, which I thought was on way too loud, brought up Club Dawn again, and said people were coming out of it being extremely sick and seeing delusion. Someone apparently spiked every drink in the entire vicinity. The drug was still unknown to the station, and I was too distracted to care. Yasmin had fallen asleep by 4 p.m., and my body was so empty. I didn't feel like rising out of the bed. It felt peaceful having her hold me close. I felt important to someone, even if it was only for the night. Having someone you're supposed to marry consistently reject you is hard, and this feeling with Yasmin seemed to make the resentment Carol and had of me feel void. Maybe I should just forget about Carolyn. Could I last a lifetime with a drunken whore? Would that really be all that bad? What do I really want though? A feel-good relationship, or one that is full of ups and downs, and that's full in every aspect. Good and bad is missing all acts of relations with Carol and worth a couple good nights with Yasmin. I slept with her that night. The next morning, I was thrown out of her apartment. She thought I had snuck into her apartment at night. She said I stole her innocence. There was no stain on her kitchen floor. And I didn't have momentary lapses of slow motion. Hopefully this drug didn't screw me over. Why does my mind play these tricks on me? I've always sort of noticed odd things as a child, but never this hardcore. I'm seeing things that aren't happening, and my senses aren't even acting in time. They just do what they want. When I was young, the most that would happen is my eyes would drop in sight. My doctor would tell me that's common in some cases, and I shrugged it off. My hearing would once in a while drop and out, but I didn't think it was that bad. I just ask for things to be repeated often. Maybe I'm getting sick, or sicker. Okay, now I'm chuckling to myself. I've never realized how those presses of the enter key and add some ominous feeling to those lines. Maybe I'm getting sick or sicker. It makes them prominent. That's neat. That's off topic. I guess I'll explain what's happening now, and then I'll sign off. I'm again at the public day I was at before. It's cozy. Makes me feel safe and comfortable. I do not have vodka in my thermos. I actually have some green iced tea. I've decided straying away from the alcohol might prove well on my part. This will be the 4th time. Mind trying this, wish me luck. I'm tired of typing. It cramps my hand. Too much typing. A story on a computer, typewriter, or writing always causes my hands to hurt with the most awful sensation. I should invent some sort of mind-reading story maker. In the meantime, I'll finish this nice cup of tea and enjoy my life. Maybe Carolyn will call, or at least pick up. Anything worth talking about, I'll let you know. N8LESS 10/19/11. Previous entry. Resplendent files no. 1. Next entry. Resplendent files no. 3. The second story. Nunca desperate. Never woke you P.S. Adia mi qui dormida. Pero nunca desperate. White en nisu ovi una flor una bella perturbator flor. Ani scalawefero it raise mi cuerpo pero la flor no estaba sola. RSOSD. Y de por UNHAD. ESA hada aratio. Anda anantio. Pero de repente abri la boca. Why unos filo OSDens devora wrong digiflor. Llamas HAB visto algot, and horrible enmiv id and opodi quit are los ojos dices diens. Sus delgados y filados diens. De repente el hodemi miro. De Davia etinia hembra. El horror se poderoti mi cuerpo. Volta poco per UKG. Prisa di la locura. Yo sabia. Acuela queri a comer mi pro fue rapide. Escu cori. Cori wike ori pearl a cori. Cori wike ori trastimi. Via al consumi. Cis ognis res pirasi en mi espalda. Escusibie como regina bansas diens. Vi su sobregestuati resti la mia. SDS mi final senti acumi vidace ebiantimus ojos. Laudiesi esperacia. Inco elvia. Insoportable yanopodius soportar lo mas. Pero gestuantes. Di harmi vens. Mercuria si monsteruo. Vo unbosk. En front di mine la hude. Dec, I do it ravese. Ardicho bosk. Put perder ad apro meek. Calma savio el vidaken and unsuspiro. An maldi suspiro deed es controle de zi oscuro bosk. Di trico. Mutuo y silencio so bosk consumami alma. A cada paso. Algo habe no sequere per est a asperendum. Marti resendum yn locu sindum cositi, CQL Hottervio Elvira. Nada puid acabrucken me suefer I mean to a warren I longward. Mandia, me qui dermida. Pero, nunca, desperate. One day I went to sleep, but I never woke up. And in my dream, I saw a flower. It was beautiful, but disturbing flower. A chill went through my body. But the flower was not alone. It was supported by a fairy, and this fairy was so cute. But suddenly, she opened her mouth, and with sharp teeth she ate a flower. I had never seen anything so horrible in my life. I could not take my eyes off her teeth, her thin, sharp teeth. Suddenly the fairy looked at me. It was still hungry. Horror gripped me. I did not want to fall prey to the madness. I knew she wanted to meet me, but I was fast. So I ran, but she ran, and ran after me. She will catch me. I feel her breath on my back. It sounded like she was gnashing her teeth. I saw her shadow right behind mine. This is the end. I felt that my life was passing before my eyes. The despair became unbearable. I could not take it any more, but just before I gave in to that monster, I saw a forest in front of me on the run from her. I decided to go through that forest. I could lose the fairy, but my quiet agony turned into a sigh. The damn wild, the dark forest, it was a creepy, dead, and silent forest. It consumed my soul with every step. Something was there. I don't know what it was, but it was there, waiting for me, tormenting me, and driving me mad. I almost wish the fairy had returned. Nothing can end my suffering now, not even death. One day, I fell asleep, but I never woke up. The third story, long way home. Jingling the sound cuts through the air and freezes my blood. It starts and stops in violent intervals, chanting metallic nonsense. 3 nights ago the bell refused to ring, shaken until my wrist ached, and my shoulder made dull popping noises. Tonight it seems to go on forever. I clutch the covers with sweating hands, again and again, like the snapping of silver teeth. The Sundust Lodge was Nebraska's finest hotel and dining establishment for 50 miles around. It was also a one-story shack with mud on the porch, which made the advertisement technically honest, unless you felt at home sleeping on dirt and catching lizards. I sit down my bag and seize the old-fashioned door knocker. 3 sharp raps. Nothing. I backed down the stairs and re-kicked the flip sign. It read VACA and CY. The porch was mostly whitened wooden, and at one point it had probably all been, but the paint was chipped everywhere from the floorboards to the dinky metal mailbox. I looked down to find several warped planks half hollowed by termites and others spongy and rotten. Charming. Maybe the place closed down already, or maybe. Muted clacking burst from the door as the lock slid back. The door swung open, and suddenly I found furious eyes boring into me. They belonged to a middle-aged man. He answered the door in shorts and a filthy t-shirt that hung off his terribly bony frame like old skin. His eyes were hardened brown and sunken in his face like riverbed stones. "What?" he said curtly. It took me a moment to find my voice. "Oh, hi. I'm looking for a place to stay for tonight. The sign said you have an open room." My question railed off into impotent silence. Seconds passed, but I waited uncomfortably as the proprietor looked me over. Finally he turned and padded off into the house in socked feet. leaving the door open. Apparently, this was my welcome. I grabbed my bag and hoisted it past the threshold. Green bottles and empty food tins littered the floor. It became abruptly clear why Iggy Pop had let me in despite his foul temper. The half-sweet chemical stench of stale smoke and alcohol hit me like a sour blanket. I pinched my nose and sucked air, trying to remember how to breathe through my mouth. I was about to jump back outside for a fresh lung, if you will, but stopped short. A series of deep scratches lined the bottom of the door. I wondered why I hadn't noticed them. Well, it wasn't as if the rest of the sundust was in great condition. I steeled my nerves, held my breath and followed the owner into the hall. He was there as I turned the corner. The clear anger from before had dissipated. Now he just looked incredibly tired, like a man who just lost a marathon and knows he still has to bike home. He wiped grease from his graying mustache and nodded me into a side room. "Have a seat in the office," he said. "I've got all the paperwork in here." I gingerly entered the tiny space, expecting to land in a heap of empties or an open manhole. Instead, it was soft carpet, with none of the mess of the living room. There was a small desk, 2 chairs, and a can of pens, no computer. I took a seat as the man shuffled to a file cabinet full to groaning and flipped through documentation. The opposite wall of the study housed a bookshelf. There were a number of thick texts in it, what I could see of the titles, in faded legalese. The top shelf held a crucifix of a sort I'd never seen before. A 6-inch bronze Jesus gazed solemnly down from his perch. The cross was painted to resemble wood, but it stood on a base carved from the genuine article. It looked well made and sturdy. Cruelly, I wondered how this bridge troll had afforded it. The slam of the file drawer snapped me back to attention. He laid a few forms on the desk and clicked a pen with a boozy sigh. "Well, you can call me Gavin, and if you just fill these out, I can get you your room key. The rate's $45 a night." Gavin droned on, reciting his terms. I glanced around the room again. My eye fell on the crucifix. "Break anything, I have to charge you for it. You can use the washer if..." The harder I looked, the more the craftsmanship seemed flawed. Jesus' face sagged, and his fingers were posed too rigidly, as if grasping for something. "Without any problems. I don't want loud music or any shit like that keeping me up. So keep it shoddy, ostentatious." It really was an ugly piece of work. I didn't want to look at it any longer. "Can't offer you breakfast, but there's stuff to eat in the kitchen. That acid, you got it?" I nodded. "Do you keep any pets?" Gavin stopped writing. He clicked the pen twice. "No pets. Why?" "Why? Well, I saw..." Something whispered to me not to finish that sentence. I cleared my throat. "Nothing, just curious." It was a horrible cover. Providity. Gavin let it go. We signed off the paperwork in silence and trudged to my room across the hall. He said no more until I asked where the bathroom was, and then quietly disappeared back into his office. I never saw him again. The room was extraordinarily simple. It was as if someone had folded up the sides of a cardboard box and dropped a cotton square inside for bedding. The only other feature was a closet, and if it belonged to Gavin, I didn't care to use it. Still, he wasn't inhuman. Just a reclusive slob. Maybe I'd interrupted him earlier. I lay restless in bed for a while, read part of a novel I don't know why I bought. Now and then, I heard the dim babble of a television playing across the hall, and the roar of planes overhead. Why would he use a guest closet? Anyway, The thought popped into my head apropos of nothing. You wouldn't. So what's in there? I hoisted myself out of bed, no large feat. It felt like sleeping in a matchbook and tried it. I twisted the tarnished knob. Inside there was a cardboard box sealed with layers of packing tape. THROWOUT. It said in marker on the side, so why hadn't he done it? Sometimes I hate my curious streak. I went back to my travel bag and retrieved a pair of nail clippers. These had a slim blade for cleaning, which sliced open the tape with a little pressure. The box flapped open atop the hillock of things. Inside was a framed photograph. It showed a boy of about 4 or 5, trying to hold the weight of a hefty puppy in his undeveloped arms. He had fine blonde hair and a grim expression of total concentration, the one that children get when they believe that in their hands rests the weight of the world. Instead of a floppy-eared canine, around the dog's neck was a beautiful brown leather collar. I put the picture down. Underneath it was a set of crude crayon maps of the house. And amateur cartography talent. Shoot another picture. The boy playing in the rain, stomping about in tiny rubber boots. A small wooden box that slid open inside. There was a little iron bell. I shook it lightly, but it was broken. The possibility struck me that this kid had moved out, and I was in his room now. Kind of interesting. Beneath the box was a trove of boyhood miscellaneous items such as found pennies, a set of jacks, playing cards, not pencils. I paused, looked back at the bed. It was very small. Did someone really sleep here until he was old enough to strike out on his own? The image of black stubby nails, clawing madly at a door, flashed into my head. A loud crush sounded from the hall. Thumps continued to echo, vibrating savagely through the thin walls. Someone cried out. It was much closer than the TV had been. I cracked the door open. I'll give in. I could hear him clearly now. Through the office door, clapped a hand to my mouth as glass shattered. Come here, mere HKK. His voice was guttural and half muffled, either by the door or by total inebriation. Gasping followed a protracted wheeze, then retching. I mean it. Putting him down, he croaked wetly. Bring him. Bring that damn dog over. He reach you. Sounds of vomiting rose in awful waves, coming and going. I shot back into my room, stuffed things into my travel bag. No time to worry about organization. More crashing and the flutter of flapping pages as books fell. A haze of slurred words, something about standing, something about man. I slung my possessions over one shoulder, heart pounding at a jackhammer pace. It was a long walk to the next stop, just as it had been a long walk here, but I wasn't taking chances. Put him out, whispered the voice behind the door. It took a note of horrible tenderness, rasping in my ear like sandpaper. Put him out. He can't come in. He can't now. I love you. Now come here. I slipped out the front and started to run. I headed east, just as I had been walking and walking. Where there was shade, I hid from the sun. When the sun went down, I munched on crackers and stepped gingerly over rocks. Wearing my crumbling shoes, sleep was reluctant. It brought dreams filled with dry scratching and matted hair. When I reached the crossroads, it was night on the third day. I felt watched, as if some magic hourglass was running low. The chilly air must have been close to 30. Sweat rolled down my neck anyway. This junction was unmarked. The path split crossways, north to south, blocking a hail of wind-bound sand. I closed my eyes and struggled to remember the map. The south only lead further into the exhausting dunes, but north would take me up to Hyannis, to people My stomach ached for real food my lips had broken, but I felt them part dryly at the thought. I forced strength into my legs and jogged for the T section. Suddenly, the wind died off, dust settled to the earth. In my ear sounded soft jingling. A small figure and a big one knelt among the dead brush. The little one was dressed thickly, shirted in a big set of work pants, shiny black raincoat awkwardly off his small shoulders. His face was down, turned, one hand toyed with something on the ground, while the other gripped a frayed rope leash. The dog at the end was large enough to overpower its owner several times over, but in all the time I watched, it never so much as tugged. I didn't realize I had frozen until the wind picked up again, shooting unpleasant shivers through my spine. The boy seemed unperturbed. He continued to prod at the dirt. How did he get out here? Something troubled whispered in the back of my mind. My curiosity overtook me. I inched a step closer, eyes firmly on the big dog, part mastiff maybe. I got ready to move if it bared teeth. I would back away. It glanced at me, uninterested, and lay down. Now the two were almost within arm's reach, just a few feet away. The boy was scratching in the dirt with a small stick, to rough parallel lines, and to right angles with a wide bar at the top. He was sketching the crossroads. I peered down and noticed he was wearing galoshes. I hear you lost. The words slipped out before I could stop them. There was a pause that lasted eons. The dog snapped its head directly at me. Something long, low and threatening sounded from within its chest. The boy dropped his drawing stick. My gorge rose as he turned to face me. A stipple of sick cracks emitted from his neck. Slowly, dreamily, the light bulb in my head flickered on from a distance. He would have looked like a farm boy out for a stroll. He had a round-cut lump of honey blonde hair, and soft eyes that spread too far apart above a smattering of freckles. One was blind. It was the sort of face grandmothers love. His nose was lightly sunburned and red from rubbing. I knelt, ignoring the dog's sudden growl, and placed my hand steady on thin shoulders. It was only a few millimeters, barely noticeable, down his left temple and clear to the cheek. His face was quietly misshapen. The cheekbone was warped and damaged, drawing an eye pitifully out of alignment. A hairline scar, almost invisible, crawled up into his hair. I parted it gently. The roots were stiff with dried blood. Something heavy and hard, no doubt. A bottle or an ugly little crucifix. I stepped away and realized I was shaking uncontrollably. The dog whined and licked his master, who stroked it behind the ears absently. He shuffled his feet and looked up at me shyly. His expression filled me with pity and grief so thick, I nearly choked. Again the strange jingling rang out. The dog slowly padded towards me. Again, no longer caring about the safety of my fingers, and touched his head where the skin was pulled thinnest. "Hey, now good dog," I murmured, "best friend." It shook my hand away, but not roughly. Instead, the big animal nipped at my sleeve urgently. I realized the metal sound was coming from somewhere under its neck. The boy hopped over and grabbed my other sleeve, and together they led me back to the drawing in the dirt. The intersection map. He jabbed a dirty fingernail at it, tracing each path insistently. Maybe he didn't think I understood, but I did, and at that moment, it seemed like the most important duty I could ever take. I pointed west. I pointed the way I had come. For the first time, one of them spoke. The dog let out a bark and skipped back and forth between his master and the road I had indicated. whining expectantly again. I was surprised that the boy wasn't simply bowled over, but he held firm instead. He nodded shortly and seemed to go deep into thought. After a moment, his ruined face opened in clear epiphany. With the hobbled grace of youth, he dropped to his knees and began to fiddle with the dog's leather collar, the air sign with muted jangling. Finally, he came away with something in his hands and shoved it into mine. It was a small iron bell, smeared with dust. But, strange, the clapper went dead silent as soon as it left him. I shook it experimentally. Nothing. No thanks. But why won't it? My words trailed off pointlessly. The two travelers were gone. I whipped around and squinted down the path. Vaguely, I could make out the back of a little raincoat and a short tail bobbing in the distance. Then they disappeared in the swirling dust. I stood in silence. I don't know for how long. Suddenly the wind howled, indignant at being forgotten. I cringed and pulled my jacket tight, but it wasn't enough. The chill still bit fiercely. I turned north. The path stretched out invitingly before me, beckoning me to Hyannis. I needed to keep walking. My journey had taken a brief stop, but theirs was almost over. That was 3 days ago. After another half day of marching, for which I can't really say where I got the energy, the sun rose splendidly on the small Nebraska village I had aimed for. Hyannis's few high-tech amenities, but a warm stove and a clean bed are more than comfort enough. And a landlady who doesn't drink. The rooms are cheap. I could probably afford to stay for a while, now that I have money in my pocket again. But I won't. I can't. 6 days ago, I took a hunch and fled from the Sundust Lodge. 3 days after that, I was there at the crossroads. Now I lie in my rented bed, clutching a pillow desperately to my ears. It won't block the noise. I wonder if I'm screaming. The bell is shrieking now, rattling with mad glee. It peals and stops, only to break out in more ear-shattering clatteress. It can't last forever. It has to stop eventually. I comfort myself. Maybe the people in the next room hear only the sound of an ordinary metal thing, refreshing and neutral, like a tumbler of cool water. But this is broken glass in my head. They must have made it by now. They must have found him as I left him, stinking of death and vomit, skinny bare legs tripping over themselves in blind panic, pleading, even as one soft eye stares back quietly, as powerful canines as lock around his throat. I can't stand it. Please make it stop. Again and again, like the snapping of silver teeth.